it's like this very real feeling of like, wow, when I paint these, each stroke, I'm thinking about the person and the generation that's going to be feeling these temperatures, the people who are born in 2050, what the temperatures will be by the time that they die, and it being like all dark purple versus my generation born in the 90s and it being like orange. Whoever is listening to this, just look at the graph. This makes much
Yeah.
more
Yes.
sense when you look at it. Seeing the like correlation, and like as I later in the day was doing just all purples and variations of purples for hours, like it's distressing. Like art is a very like connected. I think that's why I paint about climate solutions so much. Like I feel my art. I've really felt that piece on so many levels. Like it was a very like intimate experience.
Welcome to Climate Papa. This is a show about climate change, technology, and parenthood.
Welcome to episode 15 of Climate Papa, a show about the intersection of climate change, parenthood, and technology. I'm Ben Idelson, and I'm an investor in product-led climate startups. I'm based in Seattle, and I'm a papa to a 5.5-year-old girl and a nearly 3-year-old boy. The world of climate tech is small, and I noticed something happening a couple years ago. From climate newsletters to Twitter and LinkedIn backgrounds, everything started becoming a bit more colorful. There were stunning watercolors explaining the carbon cycle of oceans, the carbon impact of a hamburger, or the way that a heat pump works to magically transfer heat into a home. Nicole Kelner had arrived on the scene. She took her unique watercolor style and combined it with a deep desire to understand and communicate climate solutions. In this conversation, Nicole shares her journey to becoming a climate tech artist, and I think it's particularly inspiring as we go into the new year. It turns out her path to this new career came about on a lark of trying a 100-day challenge. While I'm not one for pushing everyone on New Year's resolutions, I'm grateful that Nicole took on that challenge that led her sharing her art with the world. With that, let's welcome Nicole.
I'm Nicole. I make educational art about climate change. I use watercolors to communicate complex ideas in climate in a simple and beautiful way.
How did you end up being, I feel like one of the preeminent climate artists and kind of what was your personal journey to that?
So I don't come from a climate background and I don't come from an art background, which is how I always like to start my story of how I became a climate artist, because it's something that I never expected to do. I grew up loving art, but the last art class I took was like AP art in high school. When I was in college, I started my first business. It was like a handbag business where it was like I taught myself how to sew, and it was this purse that you could use your phone through a plastic pocket. It was called the Smart Purse. And so I got hooked on entrepreneurship at like 18 and was like a finalist for Shark Tank. And it was like a lot of fun. And I think I actually learned more than I even realized there during that time, because I was doing so much like textile design, looking at different patterns, seeing what colors mix match well. And so like that was one path that I was thinking about. So I studied communications with a minor in engineering entrepreneurship and just like loved all of like the minor requirements for like entrepreneurship, but wasn't like a huge fan of advertising. Fast forward to today where I'm literally doing like advertising about climate solutions, basically.
Yeah.
After college, I co-founded an after-school program to teach kids how to code. I didn't have coding experience, so I learned by my co-founders teaching me, and then I would teach kids. And so that was like my first foray into like taking these big, complicated ideas and breaking them down to ways that children can understand. And did that for a few years, sold it, and then that's when I decided I want to work in climate.
What made you then want to be kind of feel like your next thing should be in climate?
So it had been like an inkling like that I wanted to for a while, where I did a zero waste challenge for a month while I was living in New York. I like made no waste, and like it was so hard, and I spent full Saturday just like cooking beans, and that was my wake-up call of wow, this is a really broken system and I like want to spend my life dedicating work towards making it better. That was in 2017. So it took like 2 years to think I can now start to look at changing careers. Then it took another year to actually get a job in climate. I joined the My Climate Journey community and got super involved in that right when it had started. There was only a few hundred members, and how I found my first job in climate. I started working as chief of staff for an organization called Climate Finance Solutions. They help companies secure non-dilutive funding like grants to help scale climate solutions. So that was like an amazing first place to work. Loved it, but it was part-time. And so I got a full-time job at a startup called Dashboard Earth as head of ops. Their mission is to help incentivize people to take climate action. But I was starting to get a little restless and burned out on like ops. I had been doing it my whole career and decided for fun to like paint a watercolor a day for 100 days. And honestly, it was pretty out of the blue. Behind the scenes was one of my best friends had done a 100-day challenge for herself. Like she posted a TikTok a day for 100 days. She went viral. Oh, that's kind of fun. Like, why don't I do my own version of that? And I'll do like watercolors. I didn't really like have any intention of it being like a career or even a viral thing. I just liked the idea of it. It just started taking off. I had 500 followers on Twitter when I started in January 2021. It's been almost 2 years. And I was growing like 1,000 followers a month, and I ended up quitting my job within 4 months, and it's been 2 years since I started now.
Wow. Such an amazing, multiple non sequitur paths, but I think that people who are meeting you, myself included, are meeting you now as you're in this position of kind of premier like visual climate communication and understanding. Oh, like that must have been something you worked towards and made sense. And I think it speaks to this like underlying, it makes sense when you think about those skill sets, like communicating coding to kids is taking like a really complex engineering system that ultimately is like human made, programming is like on top of all these human made things. And like, at least I think most of both climate problems and solutions are similarly on top of human made infrastructure systems and problems. But then connecting that to this like underlying art talent that it seems like it was kind of lying dormant in you. It's very cool.
Yeah. And the watercolor medium was something that just kind of feels like a little lucky because I never studied watercolors growing up. Like that wasn't, when you think of watercolors, they're, mostly for kids, like, or really good actual artists. There's not like a lot of in between. Like, we didn't do any watercolors in my classes growing up. They were all, I really liked the messy art mediums like charcoal and pastel. Like I liked leaving art class with my arm covered in charcoal stains. Like that was my MO. And I was traveling in between running the coding company. I was in Malaysia and I took a like 1 hour watercolor class and just fell in love with it. It was so serendipitous. And I had this little travel watercolor kit that I brought for the rest of my 8 months of travel, and just, it kind of stuck with me. And then during COVID, I kind of like realized that art is a very calming thing for me and decided to pick it up during COVID again. And just, that's when I started to do more watercolors. And I think there was something in me that knew, like, while I was thinking about making a career transition, doing watercolors every day wouldn't be like the worst thing. So yeah, it just kind of all came together.
I'm curious to get your perspective on two things. One is the role of art in general in the climate conversation, and then also your place in that, right? Because I feel like in my little like climate tech world, like you are the artist of the climate tech like sphere, which is amazing. And I think there's a lot of artists of various types and various mediums, and not just even in the kind of visual arts, but in music and film and other things that are trying to grapple around all this. I'm just kind of curious if you could bring me into that world a little bit, to the extent that you feel plugged into it, and how you think about the role of art in climate.
Yeah, I think it's something that we need more of and is so powerful. And I am trying to find more climate artists. I come from the tech world, so I'm on the same boat where a lot of my friends are in climate tech, and I don't have many art friends at all. So I don't think that I have an extensive knowledge of a lot of other artists making art about climate, but there are a few that I've seen. I really like one that's the Climatoonist. He does cartoons about satirical things in climate, which is really fun. There's a really detailed artist that does bird illustrations that I like. There's an artist that does botanical drawings about plants that are either have gone extinct or are extremely rare. I think there's just a lot of storytelling that can be done and can be super powerful, especially in collaboration with climate scientists. That's something that I really try to do and want to do more of, where finding ways to like highlight the solutions that are being created and translate them into ways that anyone can relate to and resonate with helps break through the noise a little bit, I think.
The type of art that you focus on, it seems like intentionally, is climate solution, like descriptive art, right?
Yes.
And there's like a kind of like functional value. I presume that's a pretty intentional choice. Like, why focus there versus helping people understand the problem of climate change, or helping people understand the psychology of climate issues, or like, why focus on solutions?
Because it feels the best on like a very basic level. When I paint about climate solutions, I feel more optimistic about our future. And I think that leads to people feeling more optimistic when they look at my art. And we have enough information out there that the world is basically on fire a little bit. And when I paint about those things, A, I don't feel good. B, I get way more like people commenting. I get negative comments when I create negative content on some capacity, like not always. Like I think that I have found a really nice corner of the internet, honestly. And I really like spreading the word about all these incredible solutions that are out there and the technical and cool work that is being done that a lot of people don't know about. Yeah. So I think that that has been pretty special to realize that that's my little segment, and really own that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe we can jump into it in a little bit, like what some of your favorite kind of solution pieces are. But I do want to pause on one thing, because there was a piece that I think you had done when the IPCC, the recent report came out, and had the color lines of different outcomes and timelines, and like it was like a pretty hard graph to stomach, and then you decided to paint it. And I remember you, I think, writing about that experience. I've actually referenced this, I think, in a prior episode of Climate Papa, around like it's a pretty impactful way to think about the timeline of climate change and how it's going to affect people at different ages, and as these deep purples in the worst case scenario, and like oranges and reds in the other scenarios. And could you open up a little bit around that experience of painting those lines?
Yeah, so this was a painting that was from the most recent IPCC report. I have to say that was probably the hardest painting I've made in 2 years. It was so detailed, and I just had to do it so fast that it was just bonkers. It basically has hundreds of stripes showing the way that different generations are going to be like impacted by climate change, what the temperature change will be like for children versus like when you're born, how the temperature is going to change. I had to make sure that those individual stripes were accurately correlated with the actual data. So in Photoshop, I was making my own color palette as well as referencing the IPCC report, and then like making sure that every single stripe lined up perfectly. And I use a paintbrush that is about half the size of a grain of rice, for context.
Wow.
So it was a full day of painting, and I literally stopped halfway through the day to ice my hand. I've never done that. But it turned out so beautiful, and I think the feedback I got on that was really positive, because it is a very important graph, and a lot of the data that we see and that's put out in reports is designed by standard designers. They have like a aesthetic, a look. They need it to look a certain way to blend into this report. But I really like to take the time and help those important graphs pop, make people look, because, that is something that we need to be looking at. And using these like vibrant, bright oranges and purples and like magentas, a little bit more appealing than maybe a muted version of those. The hand painted feel as well has definitely seemed to resonate with people.
That was kind of like the tactile, like physical pain of pulling that off. How was it emotionally?
Yeah, it's like this very real feeling of like, wow, when I paint these, each stroke, I'm thinking about the person and the generation that's going to be feeling these temperatures. Like as I got to that, like the people who are born in 2050, what the temperatures will be by the time that they die, and it being like all dark purple versus my generation born in the 90s and it being like orange. Whoever is listening to this, just look at the graph. This makes much more sense when you look at it. Seeing the like correlation, and like as I later in the day was doing just all purples and variations of purples for hours, like it was it's distressing. Art is a very like connected. I think that's why I paint about climate solutions so much. Like I feel my art. And I've really felt that piece on so many levels. Like it was a very like intimate experience.
It's interesting. I'm thinking about the difference between the kind of the spectrum of consuming the report, like staring at the graph a little bit, but as you said, kind of not necessarily being pulled into the aesthetic of it. And then consuming your version of it, which pulls you in more and kind of engages, visually. But then the experience that you had of creating that physically and kind of having to sit with it, not for, 10 seconds to a minute, but sit with it for a day.
Yeah.
And kind of experience the creating of those things. It makes me think about, like, with climate, how do we kind of digest the problem and the time scale? It's very hard when it's this decadal, kind of change.
Yeah.
But what we can do for people to experience some of that. I guess we'll get into your coloring book of like people actually experiencing the creating of art with you helping facilitate, within the lines, if it were.
Yeah.
So let's move to solutions. So when you paint solutions, what is your process and what are some of the favorite things to do in terms of understanding and learning? Because I assume you're learning a lot about how things work and then simplifying them, and kind of what's like your loop that you go through?
Yeah. So I have a really intense Notion doc. It's just like super organized with Kanban board of all these categories that relate to the major emitters of carbon, and then also fun categories. The biggest one that I focused on within the past few years is energy. So I'll save articles that come across my Twitter or LinkedIn, basically just like accumulate all these things. And so when I'm feeling inspired, I then go back and look through and see what I feel like painting about, so that I'm not having to like come up with something spontaneously. That kind of organizational system has worked really well and made creating this coloring book about clean energy much easier, because I had self-published a book last year that was like a culmination of my top 40 favorite paintings I did during that 100-day challenge. And that was really hard to create in one sense because there wasn't much of a flow. It was like truly just randomness. But like going into the new year, I wanted to set a new goal, a new big goal for the second year. I want to like have something that I'm like, at the end of the year, I made. And I just like want to have like a big goal I'm working towards. Well, I really wanted to make a children's book, but I just like am not there yet. I'm like, I don't have a story. I am also not confident enough illustrating, and like a lot of children's books have actual children in them, and I hate drawing people. There's too many constraints, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a coloring book. And when I had that idea, I just kind of fell in love with it, because then I realized that people are gonna be able to explore and tangibly feel and like connect with these solutions in a new way.
And how have you felt that whole journey went in terms of your expectations? Do you think of success for the coloring book to be monetary? Do you think about it as more of like the artistic success for you, all of the above?
Yeah. I have to say, I think it's the most like impactful thing I've done yet. It's tied with this random Google sheet I made called So You Want to Work in Climate, gone viral and has 700 resources and just gets shared with so many people. And I think is actually helping people getting jobs in climate, which started with the idea that I just wanted like a handful of resources to make like a cute art page. And that has taken a life of its own. And I think that's like very much one of the most impactful things I've accidentally done in my whole life. And then I think this coloring book is going to it just feels like it has a life of its own. And like, it is such a special thing to feel like I've made. And it's so unique. I think there just isn't anything quite like it, where it's educational. It's also for all ages. Like kids like it just as much as nerdy adults do. It's like just also really great for mental health and staying calm, which is so important with our eco anxiety, but also like our world at large. Like I use it just when I'm stressed. So it just feels so good and something I'm so proud of creating. And I would love to see it used in schools. It already is like starting to be used at tables by nonprofits because I have a digital version. I think like impact is definitely something I'm very motivated by, and I like what has been pretty cool. Like my business overall is like it's all a pretty virtuous cycle where I make art, people see the art, clients reach out to me to make custom art for them. I share the custom art that I've made for them. Then I make more art, and then it's just like that cycle has worked really well. But I haven't been painting as much recently because I've been so excited about this coloring book. And I think that the same cycle will still occur just because it's like a whole new level of that where it's like, I color in a page from the coloring book, I post about it, someone buys the coloring book, they post a photo of them coloring in the coloring book, and then like it just cycles there. It's pretty cool.
It's very cool. We had some pages out at the Climate Papa event, and it was like the hot activity of the table for all the kids that, could color from 2.5 to 10.
Yeah,
great.
Exactly.
Sounds like it's kind of exceeded your expectation.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was going to turn out to be like in terms of like actually getting out there. What's interesting about this is it's the kind of thing you want to get multiples of and like share with, your nieces or nephews. Like it's a holiday gift, but it's also just like a like I want to educate my kid gift. And so I think it just has a lot of natural like virality to it because of that. And my last book is beautiful, but it didn't have that same, like it's, you look at it and it's a coffee table book, but this is something that I'm not even marketing every day, but I'll get sales. And so that kind of thing is something that's been really interesting. And people just start sending me photos of it. To tie into the theme of this, like podcasts, my whole family's been so supportive, and like they're all buying books for our baby cousin. My aunt lives in Panama, and she's given books to the school there, and they're writing in Spanish Amazon reviews. Those are really special. And my other aunt, she's a photographer, and she's like been buying books for when she has her art shows. And like, it's just, like my parents sending them gifts to my other cousins. Like it's, I don't know, it just all warms my heart.
Yeah. That's amazing. And like, I think it'd feel that way if it were, presumably any project, but then the fact that it's also kind of like in this climate solution space starts to give you like, not just like I did something that gives me hope, but then I don't know if I can't help but like go to the tech term of like, it became like a platform of sorts for other people. Right. And so there's this like spreading of the experience that you have doing art, and not just generally, which would be great, but like specifically climate art and specifically climate solution art. You're like, wow, like that just hits on so many levels. what more impactful, right?
Yeah. And it's like, I think of it as like every page is like a flashcard. When I do all my research, I clearly am a very visual learner. And then I, translate what I've learned after reading X amount of pages and research and and I turn it into visualization. And then I put it in this coloring book, and people not only look at it, but while you're coloring it in, you're processing it just as deeply as, like we were talking earlier about how I was feeling when I made that incredibly detailed painting. Like, it's the same emotional feeling, but with a positive climate solution. So you're getting really in touch with that. And I have a few pages that are like climate mandalas, which is something that I am sure did not exist before me. And I love so much. They're just these like circular, repetitive patterns of like dreaming different solutions and tying them all together. And it's like, a Buddhist art practice of drawing these repetitive things that are really soothing and also helps you kind of imagine an ideal climate future at the same time.
It reminds me of a quote of yours that I love.
Is it the role of the artist is to make the future irresistible?
Yes. Yeah, and the climate mandalas, it's like we don't think about infrastructure as beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, especially like, especially the human-made infrastructure of climate. Like when you think about beautiful climate, I don't know, if we do the Google search for beautiful climate or the or the Dolly image generation or whatever, it's going to be, green hills and animals and kind of undisturbed, non-human involved terrain, which is fair. And like, that's one goal. But also like we're trying to replace really quite ugly, dirty, polluting infrastructure with what could be made beautiful, right? Like what could be made beautiful and help to train ourselves to see it as beautiful when it comes to the beautiful solar panels and the beautiful transmission lines and the beautiful, I mean, I find the wind turbines to be like quite stunningly beautiful. Naturally, but like in art as well.
Yeah, me too. And I was literally just having a call with someone. One of my like big ideas art wise, I don't know when this will happen. I think that it would be so cool to have like wind turbines that were colorful, like painted as murals, basically like a field of wind turbine murals. The simplest version of that is just like painting each one a different neon color or a different pastel color. And like it would be an art installation in the desert, basically. One of the inspirations for that is there's these like giant painted rocks outside Vegas in the desert that's like people drive hours to go see. And I'm like, wouldn't it be so cool if people were driving hours to go see beautiful wind turbines? So hit me up if anyone owns a wind turbine company and wants to help make that happen.
It so happens that I proposed to my wife in front of the wind turbines in the desert in Palm Springs back in 2014 just because it was beautiful. I didn't wasn't working in climate at the time or didn't even have that on the horizon, but it was just, I thought, one of the most beautiful scenes with the desert and the turbines. So it would, excited for the Nicole installation of colorful ones for the next phase of the party.
Wouldn't that be so fun?
Yeah. Have you found that theme of kind of making the future infrastructure kind of irresistibly beautiful? I mean, I think about that from like a product perspective. One reason Teslas are successful or the Nest thermostats are successful is it's, the industrial designers from Apple like thinking about how to make these things beautiful. Do you think that enough people are thinking about that, and what projects, and is that like a running thread, or is it just so happens that you stumbled upon it in your way and maybe some industrial designers working on the next, heat pumps are thinking about it in their way? But I just think like this whole realm feels to me very underserved. Like the way we even just calling things heat pumps is like not a beautiful thing to say, and we probably could do better. And we're positioning it against like a very dirty and ugly thing that somehow, is beautifully called natural gas, right? And I don't know. I like from it's both marketing, but also I think like just an aesthetic lens towards all of the human desires that underlie this.
I think that this is such a silly thing that pops to mind, but I saw this tweet, but I also had this in my own thoughts before someone tweeted it, and it was like there's two versions of it that are basically the same thing, and it was like, I wish Taylor Swift was dating a climate scientist. And it's like
Yeah.
that. And then there was another that was like, I wish that climate had the Barbie marketing team. And it's like, we just need to make climate cool. Like, it's just like climate solutions need to be viewed as cool. And I'm trying to get us there in my small way. I think there are some really great companies that are doing their work that same in their own way. You know, Gradient, it makes heat pumps really beautiful. Like, we're in the time where these tech companies are having enough funding to hire great designers to make beautiful climate solutions. And so I think we're gonna start seeing like the next evolution of it. A lot of it has just been about getting functionality first, I think. So you got to get that first, and then comes the like good marketing, or you're just like not able to market a bad product, even if you can, but that's not going to go that great either.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that there's just like, I have really liked using these like bright, vibrant, fun colors to like use that in a place that's usually like gray and dark and like very basic neutral things like that.
Right.
And that has been my thing where I'm like, okay, this is something I hadn't really seen before. It worked, and now I do more of it.
Yeah.
And have been able to kind of see that kind of Trojan horse of, you know, bringing something really educational in through a pretty thing has worked out well.
Just to give folks a sense, it sounds like there's a few different dimensions, and it's you doing your own work and projects, of which like the coloring book kind of is a big example of that. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you do collaborations with particular companies or nonprofits or groups.
The way that I primarily support myself is like custom commissions for startups that are working in climate organizations, nonprofits, universities. And I do like workshops too. So I do corporate workshops, and now I do like coloring parties for team building workshops, and I do all my other art like in between that basically. That and all the other art is encompassing the, you know, watercolors and coloring pages. So that's kind of how I think of my business right now, basically.
Amazing. Has it felt like these things are always risky when you go from, hey, this is a hobby project, 100 days of coloring just as a fun thing, to like, oh no, like this is a business and I'm trying to make it work as a business. Has it taken any of the fun out of it for you, or like?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I like fear, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Because I think I am a little bit lucky in the sense that I really like running businesses. Like, I come from a business background, and not a lot of artists come from that side of things. So if anything, I get a little lost in enjoying running a business so much that I don't always feel like making art. And that's kind of where I'm at right now a little, because I'm having so much fun marketing this coloring book that I haven't actually been making new art. And I'm like, oh, I guess I need to do some art, or else like I'm not going to have new clients. And so it's, you know, but the coloring book itself is attracting clients and people to do workshops. So I have to remember that even it's just different. This coloring book has launched a whole new everything at the same time. So yeah, it's just that I haven't been watercoloring as much. But I did just come up with a new idea for a series that by the time this gets published, hopefully it'll be launched. So I can tell you now. You'll be the first to know.
What's the series about?
It's like a little mini series that I'm going to do just to get me back into watercoloring, that is going to be called What I Compost in a Week. And I'm going to draw every day like what I'm composting, and it'll be a little collage of what I composted that week, as kind of like a raise awareness of why composting is so important and like the emissions that it's saving. And like, I think the moral of the story is I kind of like the business just as much as the art, and I sometimes lose myself forgetting to do art.
I mean, this is a funny thing of like, I think there's probably a lot of people that grow up in the art, you know, kind of academic world, and for some reason my instinct is they probably wouldn't stumble upon this the way that you have. Probably because it's not coming out of the art world, right? It's coming. It's like this was born out of the climate tech world, and it's like a much, I don't know, there's like a more, just like a more like functional and grounded part of it, that it's like not art in isolation, it's art like in context. That's probably one reason it's been a great business as well, because it's connected to what's happening in the business world, which is really interesting. I guess the obvious business question is, well, if you like running the business but still want to produce art, like, would you ever bring in help to do more of the art? And how do you think about like the solo nature of this versus collaborators and things like that?
Yeah. Right now I've run businesses most of my life, and I've just really like taking care of just one payroll. I'm like, it's a lot to handle everyone around me, and that is something that I'm still just enjoying not doing, if that makes sense. And
totally.
that might change, but I do miss some of the stability. That is one thing I really I kind of miss a little bit of, and I'm looking to do like have a client on retainer or do some freelance work that's like consistent every month, rather than, because my every month is a little different. I'm still adapting to having that like stress change every month, but that's like running any business. So I also have some capacity for that in general.
Like, maybe this is a tiring question in the art world, but I can't help but wonder, how do you think about the world of, generative AI art? And I've used some of your great work before, like in the guide, and using it in my venture fund memo, and the climate stripes are on my LinkedIn profile. So I use your art whenever I can. But for my Climate Papa logo, that was a collaboration with Midjourney that was fun.
Yeah.
Very different, but like curious how you've been thinking about all of those tools for yourself and for other people.
I know there's a lot of like ethical questions around it for artists, but I'm still like such a tech person that I am like excited about it at the same time. So I'm very torn. So where I'm at right now is I am using them for a brainstorming buddy, is how I think of it. At one point when I was a little stuck figuring out what pages I wanted to do next at the coloring book, I would like, Midjourney is quite good at like creating coloring pages. So I would prompt it to make like a coloring page about clean energy and see what it made. Often they were not great, but it was like, even that is useful information. One example that's pretty like applicable that people can relate to. Others are just for workshops that I do. I do like solar punk themed workshops, for example, and that is one that's really fun. And I'll have like Midjourney create some examples of solar punk features. It's kind of hard because I empathize so much with like digital artists right now, particularly because it is almost impossible to tell what is made by a human at this point, like a digital designer versus a Midjourney designer. I think there will be like a point where you could be like, make a Nicole Kelner watercolor painting, like tell Midjourney to do that once I have enough data on the internet and it can just scrape that. I don't love that feeling. Like, that kind of scares me. Yeah. And I know that's what every illustrator is feeling right now. But what I think is important for me to hold on to, and maybe other artists, is that a lot of what is important is, and what makes artists and designers so valuable, is the communication skills we have with the humans who want the art and the illustrations. And being able to have the conversations and the brainstorming I have with clients is what results in the art that I make. And a lot of the times, like, my clients don't know what they want. And it's like, me pulling out ideas from my brain and collaborating with them and like coming up with an idea, like, that is like where a human is always going to be unique. And I think that's what I like hold on to.
I also wonder if, like, maybe I'm trying to think about other markets where this has been the case. Like, I kind of think the bar and the demand might just kind of grow, and like good art, like, we kind of might have an insatiable appetite for, and the best art will probably come still from folks like you who can be intentional and thoughtful and good simplifiers of complex concepts. I kind of feel like, okay, I generated this logo with Midjourney. I wouldn't have actually like, I'm not making money from my podcast. I don't know that I would have like sought it. It didn't really displace a designer, actually. It displaced me just like sitting there with the text version of the logo. But now I'm kind of like, ooh, if I like really wanted something good, I'm kind of interested in like commissioning something down the line, right? So like it almost like grows people's ability to access art perhaps, and might grow the market in a way that like access doesn't necessarily displace. But I guess we'll have to see, and there might be plenty of cases where that's not the case. Maybe it's overly optimistic. So coloring book is done. There's lots of ways to market it. You have a couple. You're kind of getting back into watercoloring. Do you already have on your mental horizon like the next big project, a lot, kind of like the coloring book, or are you kind of letting it sit and wait and see what comes over the next few months?
Yeah, because I'm kind of out of like reflecting time, and I'm realizing that like my thing I want to do is like every year I want like a thing. So I'm like, oh my God, it's like about to be January before I know it.
Yeah,
how is
crazy.
that happening? So I want to like preemptively think of what I want my like, how is it 2024? My 2024 thing to be. So I just had an incredible call with someone right before this that he literally made me like a pitch presentation on an idea of what he wants me to do. I was like, this is amazing. So cool. It was like a full PowerPoint with graphics and ideas, and like he had pulled together like his favorite art that I've had. I was like, oh my God, this is unreal. So very grateful for like people in this community that, have seen my art. So kind of in like a little bit of a like reflecting point right now, and spending a lot of energy on the coloring book. And I really do like doing these workshops. If I go back to one of the old schools I used to teach at, and I'm like teaching about climate change and art, that's going to just be so wild.
It's full circle. Amazing.
Yeah. Honestly, the simplest thing for my next year project would be another coloring book on another theme and make it a series. And I'm like pretty tempted to do that. And it's pretty likely that that'll happen. Even that might be one of 2 projects next year. And one theme I'm thinking about is like food systems.
Food would be good.
I feel like there's so much, the nature and the food itself, and like the agriculture systems and agrivoltaics, like there's a lot there. And I try to think of themes that I'm interested in learning more about, and also that have like funding of sorts. Clean energy has been like the perfect crossover for my business, where it's like I am just so interested in it, and also there are companies there that have like funding. If they want to hire me because they see my work, it's possible. And so I feel like food systems and ag is a space that could be like along those lines. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know enough about it, but at the minimum, I'm just interested in learning more. And so I think that would be a really fun next book.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think when I think about like what people, and kids and adults like to learn about, like to color, like to interact with, I think that would be great. And and as you said, it's colorful is the thing we're already interacting with. Mm-hmm. And it's tasty.
Exactly.
Anything else that you'd want someone to know if they wanted, what's the best way to get in touch, I guess is the first question. What's the best way, I guess, both to follow you and your work? There will be some people, I think, who listen who maybe have never seen or heard of your work. So, I mean, obviously I'll show some of it and link to it in the show notes, but what would be your favorite way for people to follow along, and then also to get in touch if they had either ideas for you or ideas for commissions and things?
Yeah. My website's NicoleKelner.com. And then my Twitter is @Nicole and my Instagram is mindfulnicole. So can message me on literally anything, even LinkedIn. It's just my name, and I respond. So
awesome. Folks should reach out. I also recommend people may follow your Substack, because I feel like
my Substack is Arts and Climate Change. And I write every week, and I've gotten really into it, and it's been really fun. So would recommend that as well.
Like, especially if you enjoyed hearing about kind of your process and what you're thinking about. Mm-hmm. I figure it gives a nice inside view. Yeah,
behind the screens. Yeah, so that's artsandclimatechange.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's a wrap on episode 15 of Climate Papa. If you haven't already, I recommend checking out Nicole's amazing art at the links in the show notes. I also include direct embeds of many of the pieces we talked about, which I'll link to in the show notes as well if you want to see some of the pieces we mentioned here. On her site, there are also many fun gifts for all of your climate-loving friends and family. If you like this episode and think you know others that may enjoy it, I have one main ask. Please send it to them directly. I'm particularly excited about Nicole's work reaching more climate educators to help engage all the visual learners, and especially kids, in drawing and painting a better climate future. And for a bit of an update on me and my work in climate, I spent most of 2023 trying to really solidify where, how, and with who I can work to make a difference on climate. I'm so grateful that I had the time and space to explore not just in these conversations, but also in working with companies, reading, and plugging into the many various climate communities. I'm confident now that I'll be working on this problem for the next decade and maybe decades to come. And I'm excited to see how 2024 is going to shape up. I anticipate my next episode will be focused on this and a new fund that I'm putting together. I also just hosted a very fun hackathon with the crew at Bayou Energy. We had 6 different teams and 30 different participants hacking on their utility data and building some really interesting prototypes. I link in the show notes to the 6 team demos if you want to check that out. All right, well, until next time, here's the Balkan Bump and Lazy Syrup Orchestra remix of Mellow Kind of Hype to take us out.
On we go like